July 17, 1962. At the height of the Cold War, both superpowers fight for technological supremacy over air and space. And NASA's engineers man the front lines.
These are the early days of high-speed, high-altitude flights.
Everything is new, everything is on the edge.
In 1955, NASA's forerunner, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, commissions the X-15, a rocket-powered supersonic plane to reach the edge of Earth's atmosphere. The chief test pilot for the X-15 program is Major Robert White. A veteran of 3 wars, White holds the record for the fastest manned flight ever, over 4,000 miles per hour.
Major White and the other X-15 pilots were flying faster and higher than anyone had ever flown before.
First, he hitches a ride to 45,000 feet under the wing of a B-52 mothership. The engines burn for 82 seconds, accelerating White to 3,800 miles per hour. Nearly 60 miles above the Earth, he is higher than any person in recorded history.
He was flying very high, very fast. Suddenly there's something out there.
White radios to ground control that he sees multiple unidentified objects.
There are things out there. There absolutely is.
One particularly stands out.
He saw this strange object outside of his cockpit window.
The object seems to shadow his X-15 as he zooms through the upper atmosphere at more than 5 times the speed of sound.
It's a great surprise. Doesn't expect to see anything up there.
He's got to figure out how far away they are, how big they are, how they're moving relative to him. Are they dangerous?
The object keeps pace with the fastest aircraft humanity has ever produced for several minutes. When White lands, he reports his sighting to engineers as part of his debrief.
White's story remains consistent. The objects are small, about the size of his hand, 30 or 40 feet away, tumbling, and moving along in flight with him. All these are very puzzling aspects.
It's just very difficult to imagine what it is that could be traveling at the same speed as a Mach 4 rocket plane.
Official reports suggest the objects were caught on film by at least one of the onboard cameras. But mysteriously, this footage is no longer available.
No footage. I mean, here's a plane that's bristling with all kinds of cameras. If a film exists of what's going on outside that cockpit of an object, you can bet that will never see the light of day.
Without the crucial footage, White's testimony is the only clear evidence of the mysterious object at the edge of space.
This isn't the type of individual who's going to make up something or imagine it. He saw a UFO, and he had no reason to fabricate that story. This is a NASA Air Force mission flown by an Air Force pilot. You don't get more credible than that.
One idea is that the unknown objects could be the remains of a satellite or spacecraft.
The likelihood of it being man-made space junk or satellites is extremely remote because there weren't many things that had been up that high at that time.
I don't know what it was, but it certainly, as far as we know, wasn't anything of ours.
NASA officially describes the phenomenon as a byproduct of the X-15's experimental propulsion system.
Because of the supercooled liquid nitrogen in use, you get ice crystals and ice flakes forming on the outside of the aircraft, and as the aircraft maneuvers as it's in its flight, you'll get breaking off of these ice crystals and flakes.
If you're up at 300,000 feet, the sunlight is going to reflect off of that very strongly and make it very, very bright.
At lower altitudes, traveling at such high speeds, friction with the air would generate intense heat, melting ice crystals as soon as they form.
When you think of a rocket plane going thousands of miles an hour, you think of friction, but it was also in a vacuum, and there was precious little air around it.
There's very little resistance, there's very little friction on the outside of the spacecraft, so these ice crystals are going to float along with the aircraft.
White remained uncertain about what he saw on the flight. Many others are reluctant to accept the official explanation.
Unless they fully admit to what some of their pilots, their astronauts, have seen, we're never going to get to the bottom of the story.
NASA grapples with mysteries on a truly cosmic scale, but not all of the cosmos' riddles come from distant star systems. On a winter afternoon in 2012, strange sounds from the skies draw people from their homes. The noises you hear are authentic recordings by camera phones and home video. Witnesses record the sound across Australia, Asia, Europe, and the Americas. Analysis of meteorological data rules out any known weather phenomena capable of causing this kind of sound. Scientists desperate for a natural explanation discover that the phenomenon seems to coincide with the aurora borealis. The northern lights usually erupt as a response to intense cosmic radiation bombardment. NASA launches a fleet of 5 probes called Venus to investigate the aurora. The probes discover that violent solar bombardments can snap the invisible lines of Earth's protective magnetic field. And the severed lines slingshot powerful bursts of cosmic energy toward Earth. Mission scientist Vasilis Angelopoulos calls this phenomenon a spacequake. And incredibly, a spacequake produces sound, even in the vacuum of space.
These spacequakes create waves in the audible frequency, but they are electromagnetic. Space is full of pulsations that if you were to play as sound waves you would hear. It's almost like it is alive.
But despite the similarity, a human being would have to leave our planet to hear the noise of a spacequake.
Waves from out in space penetrate through the Earth's atmosphere only with their magnetic component. The sound portion of them doesn't make it through. Sound waves refract before they manage to come down to the lower altitudes of the atmosphere.
So far, NASA's spacequake investigation is unable to provide any natural explanation for the sonic phenomenon in the world skies. Research is ongoing.
September 26, 1950, Philadelphia. It's 10 p.m. City cops John Collins and Joseph Keenan patrol the streets. As they drive down a dark road, they see a strange object fall from the sky.
This object resembles a parachute, and it seems to be drifting down into a nearby field.
As they get closer, they quickly realize that this isn't a parachute. This is something altogether unusual, if not otherworldly.
They find a large purple mass about 6 feet across. It seemed to glow. It seemed internally luminescent, and it sparkled in the dark.
But then, seemingly aware of the cops, the weird substance starts to move.
The strangest thing about this mass is that eyewitnesses swear they saw it climb up a lamppost before evaporating into thin air.
The officers report the encounter, which makes headline news. And it inspires what will become one of the most famous alien horror movies of all time, The Blob.
The cult classic movie, The Blob, features a gelatinous mass that falls from the sky and starts devouring everyone it touches.
The original event is forgotten, and the film is taken as nothing more than harmless fiction. Until 30 years later, when The Blob returns. August 10th, 1979, Frisco, Texas. Local residents watched the spectacle of the Perseid meteor shower, so called because these space rocks emanate from the direction of the constellation of Perseus. The next morning, Sybil Christian is surprised to see 3 unexpected visitors in her front yard.
To her astonishment, there are 3 purple, plum-colored blobs.
These objects are the size of a desk telephone, and they have a texture like whipped cream.
Just like the blob discovered by the Philadelphia cops 30 years earlier. As Sybil stares in amazement, one of them suddenly vanishes.
Given the circumstances that they seem to have fallen during the Perseid meteor shower, you'd have to wonder if it isn't something that might have come from space.
Local authorities alert NASA, whose scientists conduct tests on one of the blobs and make an incredible announcement.
Initially, everyone is astonished because NASA announced these actually could be of extraterrestrial origin.
But as news spreads, the authorities move to quell public alarm. And NASA makes a second announcement.
The next day, they changed their minds and thought that it might be caustic soda from a nearby battery factory.
The theory is a factory truck picked up the caustic blobs as it was driving, and they happened to dislodge and land in Sybil's yard.
But which of NASA's 2 statements is correct?
This is actually kind of suspicious. Why would you go and announce this could be extraterrestrial if you weren't pretty sure of it being that? Are they trying to cover something up, or did they just simply get it wrong?
Sybil Christian, who saw the blobs up close, decides to inspect the caustic soda for herself.
The final nail in the coffin of this theory, I believe, is when Sybil goes to look at the actual waste at the factory, and she said, "This is nothing like what fell into my garden."
These blobs had the consistency of whipped cream, yet the industrial waste from this battery factory was very, very solid and heavy.
If there are no terrestrial explanations for these masses, what processes are going on in space that could create these blobs?
Some experts believe that certain life forms that exist on Earth could provide a clue. Known as slime molds, these single-celled organisms have existed for 1 billion years. They appear as gelatinous slime and can be found in different environments all over the world.
Slime molds appear to act cooperatively, they pulse as they move, and they have a soft, pliable texture that appears to be quite distinctive and slimy for that reason.
They're composed of like individual microbes that can kind of live on their own most of the time, but in certain situations they glom together and kind of act as like a superorganism, and they can look really slimy and kind of gloopy.
What's most fascinating about this mold is that it is intelligent.
There are a vast number of cells acting cooperatively, and that could represent the beginnings of complexity in terms of living processes.
It's like a blob of millions of brains. This collective brain has the capability of moving towards food sources and makes decisions for the community.
Some believe that the similarities between the slime mold found on Earth and the purple blobs discovered in Philadelphia and Texas may be proof of extraterrestrial life. June 2018, 40 years after mystery purple blobs fall over a small Texas town, scientists looking for living organisms in the galaxy make a shocking discovery. Interstellar space is teeming with blob-like grease.
We typically think of space as being this giant void, but we've recently learned that it's actually full of this greasy goo.
It's weird to think of parts of space as being greasy, but I mean, if you could get enough of these like hydrocarbon molecules together, you could probably get like a little greasy ball going.
But that's not all. Disturbingly, in this cosmic blob-like matter, there could be signs of life.
It's a living, process that creates this material, that forms this material continuously, and just flings it out into the space between stars. So what we are seeing in the form of this grease-like material, organic material, in such vast quantity is the result of microbiology operating on a huge cosmic scale. The total mass of this material is huge and makes up about 1/100th of the entire mass of the galaxy.
Space could be oozing with life, filling the dark void between the stars.
Some scientists believe alien life forms floating in space may use retinal pigments to capture energy from stars. Creatures known to do this have a distinct color: purple.
Could this organic space material be related to phenomena on Earth?
NASA hopes that its groundbreaking research may one day answer questions about whether mankind is alone in the universe. But others believe those answers can already be found in chapters from the space agency's past.
Shut off, stand by. Roger, Fido.
December 9th, 1965. A dazzling fireball burns through the early evening sky over Pennsylvania.
It looked like it was flaming, but it was really glowing.
Whatever it is, it's moving incredibly fast.
Thousands of people see the brilliant light as it races across the Canadian border into the United States.
It made this long S curve, flew over Ohio, over the western border of Pennsylvania.
Initial reports suggest the fireball is nothing more than an unusually large meteor.
Then we start getting reports from Kecksburg that something has landed in the woods outside of town.
In the small rural town of Kecksburg, 30 miles outside of Pittsburgh, local residents report a mysterious object falling from the sky.
The people who saw this thing come down said it was a controlled landing, it wasn't a crash.
The sight shocks local witnesses.
People saw this thing coming down from the skies. An object, acorn-shaped.
It was about 8 to 10 feet. It was glowing a purplish blue. It looked hot, and it was pulsating. It had these strange markings along the base, and nobody could make out what the markings were.
This is now a military zone. Clear the area immediately.
Within hours, the military cordons off the entire area.
And these Army troops did not have any identifying insignia on them. Nobody knew who they were. They show up, they cordon off the area. Even the Pennsylvania state troopers who were called to the site, they were thrown off the site.
Witnesses report that when they went out to the scene, they ran into folks who claimed to be NASA.
Why would NASA show up? I mean, it makes no sense.
Witnesses at the scene report seeing something loaded on the back of a flatbed truck.
People saw military big vehicles carting away this acorn-shaped thing. It was kind of, what's going on here?
In spite of credible witness reports, for 4 decades, the official explanation is that nothing was recovered in the woods outside Kecksburg, and that the fireball in the sky was just a meteor. But the story that something unidentified crashed in the woods refuses to go away. The stories surrounding the incident remain unexplained for decades, until 2003, when a NASA chief scientist, Nicholas L. Johnson, purportedly states that it is impossible for debris from the Russian probe to have landed in Kecksburg at that time of day. But just 2 years later, NASA releases a statement which seems to contradict both its own chief scientist and all the previous stories.
In 2005, we get this NASA statement confirming that their scientists did analyze metal fragments from this object. The NASA report concluded that these metal fragments did come from this downed Soviet space probe.
To date, all requests to see NASA's missing documents have been unsuccessful.
NASA's own cataloging system says there should be 2 boxes of documents about the Kecksburg incident, but sometime in the last 4 decades, they've apparently gone missing.
We may never know whether the missing documents reveal the truth about what was recovered that night at Kecksburg.
What was it? I don't know. But the government obviously grabbed it and ran with it. And they're not talking about it. And they got away with it.
NASA's search for life takes it to every corner of the solar system. But of the many scientists working on the Messenger mission to Mercury, none are expecting to see signs of life. For Professor Sean Solomon, the probe's final approach is the moment of truth after an 8-year wait.
It was a perfect orbit insertion. We all breathed a sigh of relief. The team just exploded with delight. We were there, and it was working.
As Messenger passes over Mercury's North Pole, it detects something strange.
Hydrogen measurements said there was a lot of water ice there. Tens of centimeters, maybe meters, in thickness of nearly pure water ice.
Scientists have long believed that Mercury is completely uninhabitable. But the discovery of ice on the hell planet raises new questions.
It wasn't everywhere at its poles. There wasn't a polar cap. The deposits were localized to the floors of impact craters.
What we found was that there, in fact, were locations inside these craters that could be cold enough to have ices.
Lying deep in the craters, the water ice is shielded from the sun's powerful rays. And thanks to Mercury's spin axis, the planet's poles stay permanently frozen.
The pole is straight up and down, perpendicular to the orbit.
The poles of Mercury are extraordinarily cold, minus 300 degrees Fahrenheit.
They don't see the sun, and so therefore it stays very, very cold and can keep water frozen for eons.
While Mercury's weird planetary spin seems to explain how ice can exist, it doesn't explain the ice's origin. A clue comes from something else detected deep inside the craters.
Inside these shadowed craters, on the surface of the ice, there's a material that's about as dark as coal.
What is it? What is that dark material on top of the water ice? And the leading idea is that it's organic material.
This organic material is a dark mix of complex carbon molecules that could be one of the building blocks of life, and it doesn't come from Mercury.
That led us to the idea that the water ice on Mercury came from objects that impacted from outside.
The prime suspects for delivering this messy cocktail of ice and organic materials are comets, dirty snowballs that streak across the solar system and frequently die when they get close to the sun.
Once every couple million years, a comet hits Mercury and then vaporizes.
This material hops along the surface and finds its way into these cold places where it's then frozen and then accumulates.
The incredible combination of 1 in a million comet impacts and deep craters at the poles of a world which doesn't tilt makes it possible for frozen ice to exist on one of the solar system's hottest planets. May 16th, 2010. A telescope in the hills north of Tucson, Arizona, scans the skies in the direction of the Leo constellation. It is part of a NASA-sponsored initiative searching for anything in space that could be a threat to our planet.
There are a large number of asteroids in the solar system, and so we try and map these and work out what their orbits are and make sure there's nothing going to come too close to the Earth in the near future.
Asteroid impacts can happen at any time. They've happened all through Earth history. They could even happen tomorrow.
Analysis of the telescope data reveals what looks like a possible threat object. The observers send details of the newly discovered object to the Minor Planet Center in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where it is given the asteroid designation, 2010 KQ. But almost immediately, scientists notice something strange.
Most asteroids have orbits that take them round and round the sun. This thing is really weird because it seems to have almost exactly the same orbit as the Earth.
The object seems to be tracking the Earth.
If you can't explain exactly what it is, then it's time to consult with other experts. What are we dealing with here?
NASA uses an infrared telescope facility in Hawaii to take a closer look.
There's something really weird about this one.
By studying the brightness of 2010 KQ, they're able to determine its size.
This thing is tiny. It's only a few tens of feet in length, which is much smaller than most asteroids.
The object's small size is not the only strange thing about it. NASA uses data from astronomers around the world to fine-tune their own orbital calculations for 2010 KQ. They determine that 2010 KQ's current orbit is impossible to achieve with known natural forces.
Looking at the orbit of this object suggests that at some point it's been powered.
News of the discovery sparks speculation worldwide.
Some people believe that this is an alien probe come to investigate us. But if you had the technology to visit the Earth and observe us, this orbit would be very inefficient because it only brings it close once every 25 years.
NASA's investigation continues to work on the basis that 2010 KQ is an asteroid. On May 25th, astronomers turned the Phelps telescope in Hawaii to look at the mysterious object for 30 minutes. The observations revealed that 2010 KQ is an extremely unusual color.
If this was an asteroid, we'd expect its surface to be dull and dark, and yet it's bright and reflective.
The color of 2010 KQ doesn't match any known asteroid type, but it does match something completely unexpected.
Columbia, Houston, we have a tally-ho on LDES.
In the 1980s, NASA performed an experiment testing the effect of the space environment on paints after years of exposure. When scientists compare the findings of this experiment to 2010 KQ, the results are astonishing.
The color of this object is spookily consistent with aged titanium dioxide pigment, which is exactly the same color as paint used in rocket boosters.
This object is covered in the paint they use for rockets. The conclusion is inescapable.
NASA say that this can only be a man-made object.
But where on Earth could it have come from?
Liftoff, the final liftoff of Atlantis.
When shuttles or some satellites are launched, once their booster rockets are spent, they detach and fall back to Earth.
Tracking the trajectory of this object, you can trace it back in time and see that it could be associated with a debris from a rocket launch around the middle of the 1970s.
Tracing its orbit back through space and time, scientists conclude that it must have left Earth orbit in April 1975. This narrows down the search for 2010 KQ's identity.
We're almost certain that this is the upper rocket stage of a Russian lunar probe.
But there's a problem with this theory.
Decommissioned satellites can't even escape Earth's gravitational pull, so how can this thing?
Escaping Earth's gravity takes far more power than a single Russian lunar booster rocket can provide. One potential explanation is that the booster arrived at a special position in space called the L1 Lagrangian point.
The L1 Lagrangian point is where the Earth and the Sun's gravity balance each other out. An object passing through that point can suddenly change its orbit in a very chaotic fashion. If you pass something through the L1 Lagrangian point, you can never be certain about what it's going to do.
It could be that 2010 KQ traveled through the L1 point and fell into orbit around the Sun, just ahead of the Earth. Traveling slightly faster than the Earth, it would take decades for it to catch up with us in our orbit. and be close enough to be detected by Earth-based telescopes. The best available evidence suggests that 2010 KQ is almost certainly part of a Russian lunar mission. But it will be a long time before the theory can be proved one way or another.
The jury is out on this one for now. We're going to have to wait until 2036 before this object comes back towards us again.
An invisible force is pulling entire galaxies towards a single point in space.
Imagine something so big that hundreds of galaxies are being pulled in that direction.
That's not supposed to happen.
And nobody knows what it is.
There's a lot more to the universe than we actually knew or actually even thought of. So who knows what could happen?
June 2001. NASA launches the WMAP Deep Space Probe to gaze into the furthest reaches of our universe. It tracks the movement of entire galaxy clusters. 7 years later, its data reveals something that doesn't make sense.
Many galaxy clusters were moving toward the same location in space, and that was not expected.
Scientists at NASA's Goddard Space Center review the data and reach the same incredible conclusion.
The galaxies are sort of moving together in one particular direction, and that sounds really, really unusual to us.
This should not be happening. According to the Big Bang Theory, galaxies should travel in multiple different directions.
Okay, copy. The next is to mate P5 to J5. Okay.
September 20th, 2006.
Good connectivity. Okay, and of course your next is the outboard one, H12. Yep, that's unheaded. No kidding.
Space Shuttle Atlantis prepares to come home. Its crew has spent the last 12 days assembling the International Space Station. Then something happens that no one expects.
Houston, Atlantis.
Go ahead.
There's some kind of reflective structure.
Mission Control asks Commander Brent Jett to describe what he sees.
A structure that's definitely not rigid, or it's not a solid metal structure. Doesn't look like anything I've ever seen on the outside of the shuttle. That's for sure.
Mission Control take remote control of the payload bay camera. That's when things start to really get interesting.
Okay, we're seeing 3 or 4 objects.
No, there are 3 objects.
Strangely enough, at that point, you have multiple objects, 2 more that join in and essentially form some sort of triangular formation.
For 20 minutes, Atlantis tracks the flashing lights across the sky, beaming images back to Mission Control.
They're going over the video that you guys sent down.
Video is looked at right away, and engineers jump on it right away. Find out what it is.
When news of the sightings reaches the media, it causes a sensation.
Everyone's buzzing about these 3 objects that we're seeing.
We're awash with stories about unexplained craft, but when you get these from astronauts, you pay a little bit more attention.
In the lore of what are termed unidentified flying objects, one of the most iconic shapes in all of that is the triangle, so this fits the bill.
Based on the way the objects are moving, NASA assumes this is space debris reflecting the sunlight.
You are flying through a vacuum, so things that are out in space will generally tend to hang out together. Having 3 objects, you always have a triangle.
But not everyone agrees with the official explanation.
NASA's explanation of space junk, to me, is just, just ridiculous. They should be able to recognize what space junks are. These guys are astronauts, okay? They're trained for this.
But NASA really does suspect they're tracking space junk, and they're worried. because 3 years earlier, shuttle debris brought down the shuttle Columbia.
Following what occurred on STS-107 when we lost the Columbia, NASA is very interested in tracking virtually every piece of debris.
NASA fears the Atlantis is seeing a critical piece of its hardware that's broken off.
In mission control, we really want to get pictures like this of anything floating nearby any shuttle, especially if it appears to have come off the shuttle. This kind of warning that was missed in 2003 are the warnings you want to get every time, and you want to find them out, you want to see them, you want to report them, and you want to react to them.
Unsure what these unidentified objects are, NASA doesn't take any chances.
They've decided that based on this object that we saw, that we're going to wave off tomorrow. So our next deorbit opportunity is going to be on flight day 13.
Atlantis, we copy.
NASA delays the landing so they can check that Atlantis has not been compromised.
This is Mission Control Houston during this survey to confirm the integrity of Atlantis's heat shield.
In this case, it looks like it's more likely to be an incidental object broken free accidentally from the shuttle. And I believe that's in the end the NASA decision.
One day after first sighting the mysterious flashing lights, STS-115 is finally clear to land.
15,400 miles an hour. Altitude 225 feet.
When they later examine Atlantis, NASA confirms that it was hit by a micrometeorite.
Touchdown.
Welcome back. Congratulations on return to assembly.
No one knows if this was related to the triangular formation spotted by the crew. But NASA's caution brings the shuttle safely home.
Atlantis was a terrific ship. It was real critical that she perform well, and she did.
Kitt Peak Observatory, Arizona. Astronomer Jim Scotty hears reports of an unusual-looking comet streaking through space. He decides to take a look.
I set up with my 1.8 meter telescope and take some images. And in fact, it does have sort of a weird look.
The object is unlike any comet he's ever seen.
It's got a long, narrow tail and a little funny business going on around the head of the comet. It's really hard to tell exactly what's going on, but something is interesting there.
The fuzzy image appears to have a probe-like arm reaching out from the main structure. News of the bizarre object hurtling through our solar system prompts NASA to take a closer look. Using the most powerful tool in its arsenal, the Hubble Space Telescope. Images from its giant 8-foot mirror are sent directly to NASA scientists. What they see is completely unexpected.
When you first see it, you think, well, that can't be normal. That can't be natural.
We all step back from the screen, and in every image, it's there. It's in the shape of an X. It's an X in the sky.
Little X going on.
Very peculiar.
The X shape isn't commonly found in astronomy.
Why does it look like an X?
It doesn't look like something that was made naturally.
The object is traveling at 11,000 miles per hour.
Is it some kind of construction? Is it some kind of spacecraft?
The giant X is more than 1,500 miles across. No machine remotely like it is manufactured on Earth. But it also doesn't resemble any known natural phenomenon. Astronomer J.J. Cavallars puzzles over the evidence, concluding that the intersecting structure is a result of a freak event, perhaps a collision between two asteroids.
When you do the simulations, we see that impacts that would have resulted in such a structure being formed.
But this remains only a theory.
There's more that we don't know than we do know. That's just the nature of the universe.
We may never know if the glowing X moving through space at 15 times the speed of sound is a sign of extraterrestrial life. December 1998. 6 NASA astronauts are about to open a new chapter in space exploration. Their mission: to assemble the International Space Station, the first permanently manned satellite to orbit the Earth. Jerry Ross is the spacewalk mission specialist.
When you're starting to lay the cornerstones of something as important as the International Space Station, you're pumped, and you want to get on with the program.
If the other one has a -1, then you've hit the nail on the head.
7 days into the mission, Ross and fellow astronaut Jim Newman are installing thermal protection on the new space station when someone spots something unexpected.
The crew member said, "What's that?" And I'm starting to look around, trying to understand, what's that? What are they talking about?
The crew immediately follow NASA's UFO sighting protocol.
The first thing we try to do is to take pictures of what we see so that we have photographic evidence.
Back on Earth, the photographs create an instant sensation in the UFO community. They see a link to a mysterious object from the 1950s, known as the Black Knight. Some people thought it was extraterrestrial in origin, others that it came from closer to home.
The Black Knight goes back to the early years of the space age, and even before. People begin to watch the skies looking for satellites, secret ones.
These so-called dark satellites were unexplained blips that mysteriously appeared on radar. And sometimes ominous black shapes were spotted hovering in the sky. At the time, the Russians accused the U.S. of space espionage, while the U.S. suspected the same.
The Black Knight is just one of many things that we don't have explanations for. Certainly, people don't understand that just because it's ours doesn't mean we tell everybody about it.
Good, I'll guarantee you.
But Jerry Ross doesn't buy the dark satellite theory. He believes there's a simpler explanation.
Jim was supposed to put a thermal blanket on the outside of the station to protect it from heat losses.
Well, we can start in the basement, work our way up.
I was ahead on my task, so Jim offered to give me the thermal blanket and let me attach it. When somebody said, "What's that floating away?" I looked and I saw this blanket. I looked at the tether where it was supposed to be, and it wasn't there.
Jerry, the thermal covers got away from you. How did it do that? I don't believe this.
In this case, it's a story of an oops. Dropping a piece of equipment. It wasn't alien. It was a mistake.
It was a really bad feeling.
The blanket looks black because its reflective surface is facing away from the Earth, out towards the darkness of space. But not every sighting of the Black Knight can be so easily explained.
There were reports in the 50s of strange things in orbit around the Earth. We don't know what they were. They weren't ours as far as we know. We don't think they were Russians either. What does that leave? Who knows?
Bill Young is an Arizona-based astronomer who's taken it as his mission to watch out for near-Earth objects that could pose a danger to us.
In September 2002, Young spots a bright object in orbit around the Earth, which sets off alarms.
This object became very apparent as something unusual, primarily because of its motion. It was moving very fast and moving in a velocity that's very much like the velocity of the Earth.
The mysterious object is more than 60 feet across and orbiting close to the Earth. Young immediately reports the sighting to the authorities.
The first thought is, this is an asteroid.
NASA takes the threat of an asteroid impact very seriously.
Asteroids are kind of important because they might occasionally beat the heck out of the surface of the planet.
Asteroids are traveling at about 30 miles per second. That's an incredible velocity. And when you have an object that has mass That's a lot of kinetic energy.
It's probably what did in the dinosaurs.
But asteroid J002E3 isn't behaving like an asteroid at all. Most asteroids trace a regular orbit around the Sun within the belt between Mars and Jupiter. But this mysterious object doesn't do that.
This thing goes around the Earth, then it shoots off, it goes several times around the Sun, it comes back.
Concerned, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory joins other scientists in the investigation. They direct the infrared telescope in Hawaii towards the object for a closer look.
This is the most odd thing we've ever seen. And we pulled up the spectrum, and it was full of paint.
The exotic anomaly has a coating with the same chemical signature as industrial paint.
This object was no natural asteroid. It was unlike anything we'd ever seen before.
It's paint. This can't be an asteroid.
Raising an alarming possibility.
When you think about it, we use spy satellites, and here's this object orbiting the Earth. Why wouldn't an alien culture use spy satellites?
NASA's Jim Oberg doesn't buy that theory. He supports further investigation of the paint evidence. Detailed analysis of the data reveals the entire surface of this 60-foot object is covered in titanium dioxide, a compound that makes paint white. The color of NASA hardware. But if this is a part of a rocket, it's in a very strange place.
The question is, how did it get there?
NASA connects the dots and comes up with a plausible explanation.
Based on the orbit, and based on the fact this object is covered in paint, we're able to calculate backward and determine that this object is the third stage of the Saturn V rocket that carried astronauts Conrad, Bean, and Gordon to the moon on Apollo 12.
NASA concludes that the old rocket booster jettisoned en route to the moon somehow found its way back into Earth's orbit.
They just float away, but you don't worry about it.
NASA closes the case. But for some, the theory seems too convenient.
Delta Sierra Juliet.
Bravo.
An air traffic controller receives a mysterious transmission.
The pilot was talking to the air traffic controller about something hovering in the sky near his plane.
Suddenly, the aircraft vanishes.
This is scary stuff. People don't just disappear.
The incident is so strange, it draws the attention of a senior NASA scientist. October the 21st, 1978. At 7:06 p.m., the Air Traffic Control Centre in Melbourne, Australia, receives a strange transmission from trainee pilot Frederick Valentich.
Just as he was breaking the coast of Australia, he asked the question, is there an airplane above me?
It's hovering, and it's not an aircraft.
When Air Traffic Controller Steve Roby checks, he finds no other flights that are scheduled over Bass Strait at that time. Valentich maintains radio contact, and his reports soon become even stranger.
Frederick Valentich said that there was something hovering in the sky near his aircraft, and he at one point said it was metallic and very, very large. There were 4 bright, intense lights, like on an aircraft, and there shouldn't have been anything there.
These words are the last anyone hears from Freddie Valentich, but the transmission from the doomed plane continues.
The noise is sort of scratchy. It sort of sounds metallic on the transmission.
This is 17 seconds of noise, unlike anything that any air traffic controller has heard before.
At the time of the investigation, there are no witnesses to the fate of Valentich or his aircraft.
Neither Valentich nor his airplane were ever found.
The Australian government launches an investigation. When it hits a dead end, the missing pilot's family turns to a NASA research scientist for help.
Richard Haines is the real deal. He's a research scientist who spent many years studying cases of UFO reports.
Haines calls the incident the Melbourne episode and juggles the investigation alongside his research duties at NASA. In his quest for answers, Haines chases down every lead.
He's interviewing everyone connected with that case, looking at aircraft maintenance records, anything that could give a clue as to what happened to that plane.
After 4 months of painstaking research, Haines uncovers a lead the official government investigation either never found or never followed up. A unique photograph, capturing an unknown aerial anomaly.
About the same time, 60 miles away on the Australian coast, a photographer is taking a photograph of the sunset.
The time coincidence is uncanny, and the image that the photographer captures appears to show an unidentifiable object floating above the ocean in midair.
A rigorous investigator, Haines questions the photograph's authenticity. But the image does open up potential new avenues of investigation.
With this object photographed so near to the time of the Valentich sighting, it's tempting to say that the two are definitely related.
Haines focuses on identifying the weird noise recorded in Valentich's final transmission.
The sound is the only piece of concrete evidence that makes this different from any other light aircraft flight.
In 1987, the NASA investigator puts forward an astonishing hypothesis.
The metallic sounds might possibly be the contact of a disc, let's say, or a vehicle of some kind on his airplane. It's rather far-fetched, but we have to consider it as a possibility that he was abducted by some race or species that's capable of doing this sort of a thing.
But Haines and subsequent investigators also have to consider other explanations. Former US Air Force pilot and astronomer James McGeer has a less controversial but still unproven theory.
It's fairly apparent that the four lights that caught his attention were Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the bright star Antares. It so happens that Venus that particular night is the brightest it ever gets. And he started looking at that and probably inadvertently started the airplane into a slow turn. And as this turn builds up, it'll get tighter and faster and faster. You lose lift, the aircraft starts descending, and pretty soon the aircraft is out of control. But he's keyed the mic. What is the sound? Is it the aircraft actually breaking up from G-forces from the graveyard spin? You know, we really don't know.
Haynes's investigation concludes that Valentich probably crashed into the sea. But to this day, he refuses to rule out the possibility of extraterrestrial involvement. And without further evidence, the case remains open. In 2012, the space agency's planet hunting team spots something that baffles even them. NASA's Kepler telescope finds 2 planets orbiting a star in the distant Cygnus constellation. But the data from the telescope suggests they're doing something unnatural.
Both planets have been pulled out of the equatorial plane.
The star is spinning like this, and the planets are going around like that. It's all very peculiar.
You have to wonder, are we looking at something else besides conventional planets? Are they really planets? Are they artificial?
If these bodies were artificial, they'd have to be bigger even than the fearsome Death Stars of Star Wars. The engineering involved would be far beyond human technology. But planetary orbits such as these do not happen when planets form naturally.
Something very strange must have happened to these 2 planets in order to have them both misaligned the same amount from the equatorial plane. That's the hard part to explain. You'd need something with some unholy power to shift it out of an equatorial orbit.
The question is, what could create such a force?
As an alternative to the Death Star hypothesis, planetary scientists have summoned an invisible planet.
And we speculated that there was this additional body further out that was much larger. But we don't know that it is there yet, and we don't know what it is or how far away it is, just that we have a hint that this extra body further out might be true.
This invisible planet, labeled Kepler 56d, would have to be huge, 3 to 4 times the mass of Jupiter. Capable of exerting such an immense gravitational pull that it could compete with the gravity of its own star. Whatever the two rogue objects are, they are doomed. In 130 million years, the star will expand, consuming them both. The dark world we call 56d will be the only survivor of the apocalypse.
A mysterious object appears on the cameras of the International Space Station.
Whatever this object is, it doesn't appear to be anything that's docked with ISS before.
Moments after the object materializes, the live video feed goes down.
What's going on? Is there something NASA doesn't want us to see?
January 29th, 2014. The International Space Station orbits 220 miles above Earth. The cameras of its live video feed operate 24 hours a day.
Amateur observers are looking at the live feed from the International Space Station when they see a strange, yellow, elliptical-shaped object.
People watching the footage on Earth notice the object seems to hold the same position relative to the space station for several minutes.
Just minutes after it appears in the live feed from the International Space Station, the camera cuts out. So the question becomes, is this a coincidence, or is it something that NASA doesn't want you to see?
Whenever we see something unidentified next to ISS, we have to assume it's potentially dangerous.
When the footage goes viral on the internet, many commenters claim the object is nothing more than a piece of orbital debris.
Some people surmise this could be a piece of space junk, a pretty big piece of space junk, and that would be a little bit worrying to be so close to the ISS.
A piece of debris of this apparent size would be a deadly threat to the ISS. But the mysterious yellowish object doesn't behave like space junk.
It's not just a piece of space junk, because these pieces of debris are orbiting the Earth at 17,500 miles an hour. They're not going to come up to the station and just sit next to it nicely like that.
Experts consider the possibility the object could be part of the existing infrastructure of the ISS.
Now, this thing wasn't on the schematics of the space station. That would have been an obvious thing to check, so it's something else.
This appears to be attached to the Russian Soyuz site and doesn't appear to be any of those other kinds of modules.
The Soyuz spacecraft is the main form of transport for astronauts traveling to and from the ISS.
So this thing was right near the docking port of the Russian Soyuz module. I mean, was it trying to come aboard? Did it have permission to come aboard?
Could this mysterious yellow object be an unidentified docked spacecraft?
The shape of the object is unusual. It does appear to have some point to it, which could indicate that it intends some sort of atmospheric penetration.
The object's aerodynamic, streamlined proportions lead some observers to theorize this could represent a new top-secret prototype spacecraft.
NASA and other space agencies have been trying for years to develop something that would be very important for space travel, and that's reusable vehicles.
The curves are similar to a reusable hypersonic spacecraft that could make atmospheric flights.
NASA has two known craft bearing a superficial resemblance to the mystery object, hypersonic test vehicles called the X-51 and the X-43.
They have set world speed records for airplanes, although they're unmanned, of Mach 5, 6, Mach 7. That's called hypersonic.
But neither of the known NASA craft are designed for space missions.
There have been some who speculated that this object was the next iteration of the X-51 or the X-43. I don't believe so. The X-43 and the 51 were both what are called air breathers, and that means they had to have atmosphere in order to fly.
NASA does have another engine system in development that could get a craft out of the atmosphere and flying through space. The magnetohydrodynamic drive converts the energy of a craft's movement into electricity. Then it uses the electricity to vaporize gas or liquid, turning it into a propellant. The design has no moving parts and is already proven to work.
Once you get out of the atmosphere at 17,000 miles an hour, you can just keep going. So all you need to do is stock up with fuel and air, and you can go as far as you want.
Whoever develops this technology first has a massive edge. They will make space their own backyard, and everyone else will be stuck playing catch-up.
Analysis of the image appears not to support the idea the object is an advanced prototype spacecraft.
This bright object here could actually be a lens reflection of the solar panels which are brightly lit on this Soyuz spacecraft. Or it can be an internal reflection off of instrumentation in the window through which this video was taken.
But the simple explanations do not satisfy everyone.
It wasn't like a piece of lint on the lens or some optical illusion of some sort, because the Earth moved beneath it, the light came and went, shadows came and went, and it seemed to have an actual presence. So that's mysterious.
Coming up, panic spreads as scientists discover living organisms falling from the sky in a mysterious blood-red rain.
We put them under the microscope and we see they are biological.
I don't know what they are. I can't tell you.
A storm of blood-red water falls from the skies of southern India.
It looks like a red rain of blood, like something out of a biblical plague.
Analysis of the strange fluid seems to show the presence of something living within it.
It seems like the more we learn about this organism, the less we know.
July 25th, 2001. Showers of bizarre red rain shocked the people of Kerala in southern India.
Lots of villagers collected buckets and bottles full of water that was, in some cases, almost blood red.
When the blood rain keeps falling for 2 months, fear spreads among the province's 30 million inhabitants.
It wasn't a simple event that happened in one tiny place. It was over a widespread region, and the amount of water involved was huge.
If something like this is going to happen in your hometown, you're going to want to know what's going on.
2 Indian scientists decide to investigate the mystery.
The 2 scientists who investigate this go out to collect samples to find out why the rain is red.
Dr. Godfrey Lewis and Dr. Santosh Kumar gather samples of the mysterious rain and speak to witnesses about the events leading up to the rainfall.
Scientists asked local people and discovered there was a loud boom just before the red rain started to fall.
An official report suggests the loud bang could have been a sonic boom caused by a meteor exploding as it hit Earth's atmosphere. A disintegrating meteor could explain the red rain.
If the meteor exploded, dust could have remained in the atmosphere, and that could have affected the color of the next rain when it started to fall.
It's a plausible theory. Earth is bombarded by up to 78,000 tons of meteorites every year.
An unidentified object in Earth orbit starts stalking Russian spacecraft.
If a mysterious object suddenly appears in space and then starts maneuvering as if it's under directed control, people are going to start asking a lot of questions.
The disturbing appearance sparks fears of a space arms race.
When something like this happens, NASA is definitely going to be concerned.
Today, space is the frontier for human exploration. But there are other craft in the darkness. Some serve a sinister purpose. May the 23rd, 2014. The Russian Space Agency announces it's launching 3 satellites.
Generally speaking, everybody who launches spacecraft tells everyone else what they're doing.
It's the only way that you can ensure safety of the launch and the safety of the other countries so that there's no difficulty or collision.
The satellites, numbered 2496 to 2498, are part of the Russian Cosmos series.
The Cosmos satellites are a Russian series of military communication satellites. They're used to relay messages from ships at sea and ground forces back to their base.
Space enthusiasts across the globe tracking the 3 new satellites see something totally unexpected. A 4th object appearing in Earth's orbit.
So when Russia launches 3 satellites and acknowledges that and tells everybody, and then does a 4th, it's not only mysterious and concerning, it could be potentially dangerous.
At first, amateurs assume that the mystery object is space junk.
You do get plenty of space junk which comes from the launchers and from operations in orbit, but this is unusual. It seems to be moving in a fixed fashion.
The US Department of Defense begins to track the 4th object. To their amazement, it starts to move like it has a mind of its own.
This isn't a weather satellite or communication satellite. Those don't maneuver very much.
If you have an object that shows up in space that is clearly under intelligent control, you're going to have a lot of people asking questions about what's going on.
The mystery deepens when the object then seems to rendezvous with other Russian spacecraft.
If in fact the Russians have very maneuverable spacecraft, satellite or otherwise, that can change orbit, that can go to other satellites, there are a lot of possibilities on what that could accomplish, all the way from being a repair station or a refueling station for other satellites.
Despite repeated requests for information, the Russians refuse to comment on the unidentified object.
Part of the Russian rules are to deny everything and admit nothing.
The Russians aren't saying anything. It's like, go home, nothing to see here.
I never believe them when they say that. You know, I don't believe anything that they say anyway, so I feel like it's something that we always have to look into.
The West faces the alarming prospect that the unidentified object could be a new breed of space weapon.
The idea of anti-satellite weaponry is old. It goes back to when satellites were first developed. If somebody's going to put up a satellite, somebody else is going to say, well, we'll take it out.
You don't need James Bond laser beams to kill satellites. You need other satellites to kill satellites. Things in orbit are actually moving quite fast. And to destroy something in orbit, all you have to do is put something in front of something else.
If Russia's mystery object is a satellite killer, it could mark the beginning of a space arms race.
For one of the great powers to destroy the satellites of another major power would be a really dramatic act and be the precursor to something major and dangerous. If it happened during a time of escalating tensions, it could be the prelude to war.
Russia's military intervention in the Ukraine has raised tensions with the West to their highest level since the Cold War. And deployment of a space weapon would violate a major international treaty.
Every major space power has signed up to the Outer Space Treaty, which bans the development of weaponry in space. That doesn't mean that it can't be done in secret, though.
After 7 months of increasing pressure from the West, Russia finally breaks its silence. They claim the object is nothing more than a university experiment.
At first, Russia doesn't even acknowledge it. Then they say it's doing peaceful university science. Well, why didn't they say that when it was launched?
It could be a spy satellite. It could have abilities to inspect things on the ground or other objects in space that we don't know about.
The Russian object gets the name Cosmos 2499. If it does have any offensive capabilities, they remain hidden.
Russia rarely tells you the truth, it seems, and if they do, it's to their benefit.
As NASA's New Horizons probe approaches the dwarf planet Pluto, Mission Control loses contact.
We lost all communications with the spacecraft in a period of about a second and a half.
Now, NASA must fight to save the $700 million mission.
The whole mission could be over in the blink of an eye.
NASA plans its missions of exploration in extraordinary detail. But there are things in the darkness that no human can anticipate. July the 4th, 2015. NASA's New Horizons space probe is just 10 days away from Pluto and 4.8 billion kilometers away from Earth. Its mission is to photograph Pluto's surface, collecting new data about this mysterious dwarf planet.
The New Horizons project is the first time that humankind has explored Pluto and the Kuiper Belt.
It's all coming to this moment after 9.5 years of flight and who knows how many years of development before that. So this is right down to the wire.
New Horizons Mission Control is preparing for the spacecraft's flyby of the unexplored world when it suddenly goes quiet.
I got a phone call from my project manager, and he called me to say, "Alan, we've lost contact with the spacecraft. That should never happen."
The out-of-log message on the computer screen means they are getting no data from the spacecraft. Something has happened to New Horizons on the approach to Pluto.
It's about the worst thing that can happen in a space mission, because if you can't communicate with it, then you can't even begin to diagnose and solve the problem.
Unless a solution is found, this could be the end of the mission.
Over 15 years of hard work could all be for nothing. No communication means no data.
10 days before the flyby and only 3 days before the flyby data collection is to begin, we're presented with the biggest emergency in the mission. And the clock is ticking. We can't delay the flyby.
NASA's experts call a series of crisis meetings. They suspect the issue lies with the probe's onboard computers. NASA's mission is to explore the unknown.
There's more that we don't know than we do know. That's just the nature of the universe.
In the search for answers, it launches its scientists into space. Its craft beyond the limits of the solar system.
Taking risks is part of making discoveries. Space exploration is like lighting a match, and we don't know what lurks in the shadows.
Hey, what is that?
There could be anything out there.
A NASA satellite captures a huge cosmic explosion.
Suddenly, this giant object just appears out of nowhere.
It looks like there's something in the orbit of Mercury.
Right there. What is that?
Looks like a flying saucer. What's that doing there?
NASA's stereo program uses twin spacecraft to look at the sun from 2 angles. The cutting-edge extreme ultraviolet sensors create unique images of the most destructive events in the solar system.
These are these huge explosions from the surface of the sun, and they put out a lot of mass, a lot of plasma that is emitting light. And as this plasma travels, it encounters the planet Mercury.
Mercury's proximity to the sun makes it a prime target for these solar rejections.
These magnetized bubbles of burning plasma are called coronal mass ejections. And usually, as long as they don't fire at Earth, they do no harm. But in December 2011, a blast lashing towards Mercury appears to strike something.
Just before striking the planet Mercury, suddenly, out of nowhere, something appears.
It looks like a spacecraft.
It's almost as if a spaceship's cloaking device just got destroyed.
It's like those moments in Star Trek where the Klingon bird of prey suddenly reveals its presence.
The object becomes known as the Mercury Mothership. The appearance of the unidentified object on images from NASA spacecraft generates intense speculation.
A lot of people look at that video and say this proves that spacecraft are hiding out there in our solar system, and this one, the camouflage, was simply blown off by the solar rejection.
The notion of cloaking technology for spaceships being able to hide is super popular in science fiction, in Star Trek, but it's actually real technology that we have right now.
one of the world's leading defense contractors, already has working prototypes of an advanced cloaking device capable of masking the infrared signature of war machines as big as a tank. But even though cloaked spaceships are a theoretical possibility, analysis of the NASA imagery reveals there may be a simpler explanation for the Mercury mothership.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this is not an uncloaking alien ship.
It's an artifact of the image processing. Each day that Soho takes photographs, those images are combined into a movie. Things that aren't moving get taken out. Things that are moving stay behind. And in this video, what's moving? The stars are moving, Mercury is moving, the solar energy is moving. What we're seeing here is actually a ghost image of Mercury from the previous day.
What looks like an uncloaking ship was in fact Mercury the day before.
When NASA probes the far reaches of space, it must be prepared for anything.
The universe is an enormous place. It's mind-blowingly large. We are just scratching the surface of understanding.
The one thing nobody expects to find is total nothingness. A giant hole in the universe.
We just didn't believe it. We thought there's got to be something wrong with the calculation. There's no hole in the universe which is that big.
To see nothing, well, that's just plain bizarre.
In 2007, astrophysicist Lawrence Rudnick is using the WMAP satellite to plot radiation from the Big Bang, when he sees something strange.
When you look at the map, you see spots which are a little hotter and spots which are a little colder, and it just sort of looks like a random pattern. But there were some things that just sort of stuck out like a sore thumb. There's a spot that's just colder than it should be at random, and that's the thing that we call the cold spot.
Intrigued, Rudnick uses the Very Large Array radio telescope in Socorro, New Mexico, to take a closer look at this cold spot. And what he finds is mind-blowing.
There's a hole. There's nothing there.
The Big Bang Theory predicts a universe that has a very uniform distribution of matter. The problem with the giant void is that it's so large and it appears empty of matter. And that's quite mysterious because from the Big Bang Theory, we expect everything to be spread uniformly.
For most astrophysicists, the supervoid is a puzzle, an anomaly in need of investigation. For Laura Massini-Houghton, it's something much bigger. Her explanation is that the supervoid is nothing less than evidence of the existence of multiple universes.
The giant void is giving us hints that we are not that special. Our universe is not at the center of the cosmos, it's just a domain, a member in a much larger and more complex structure. We are embedded in a larger space-time, in a multiverse.
The multiverse is the possibility that there are other universes than ours, making space not the final frontier.
The idea that we might actually be seeing a trace of a parallel universe bumping into us in some way, it sounds like science fiction. But so often we find science fiction becomes science fact.
If Professor Massini-Houghton is correct, we may have to revisit the Big Bang Theory. But when it comes to a phenomenon as far beyond human understanding as the supervoid, there are no easy answers.
We don't know where it came from. We don't know how it can exist. And I hope I live long enough to see the mystery resolved.